for our GMA Pride Month Spotlight, honoring LGBTQ+ stories and accomplishments all month long. This week, we are bringing it to the ballroom.
For decades, they stood as the flawless embodiment of masculinity, galloping fiercely across the desert, firing guns with an icy expression, and then passionately kissing the fiery starlets on the silver screen. Yet few could ever imagine that in real life, some of them had never once held a woman's hand, never gone on a date, and were never involved in any love scandal simply because the person they truly loved was a man. There were those who quietly lived with their boyfriends for 55 years, yet all of Hollywood would only refer to them as a close manager. Some died of AIDS, but the newspapers of that era dared to describe it only as severe pneumonia. There were also those who left behind hundreds of love letters to their partners, but the moment their eyes closed forever, the family rushed to burn every piece of evidence, leaving behind only one chilling sentence: no one must ever know. Why did they have to hide? Because if even a single intimate photograph were to surface, contracts would instantly be torn apart. Directors would turn their backs, studios would cut their roles, and entire careers could collapse overnight. Hollywood had the power to raise them up as legends, but it was just as willing to bury them without hesitation if the truth were ever revealed. In this video, we will take you deep into the darkest backstage corners of the film capital, where 10 stars carried the greatest secrets of their lives with them all the way to the grave. 1. Paul Newman, the love letters that were never sent. Behind those piercing blue eyes that once made audiences around the world pause in silence for a few seconds whenever they appeared on screen, Paul Newman carried within himself a silence and emptiness that few could ever imagine. A man whose outward appearance seemed nearly flawless, a cinematic legend admired by the entire world, yet throughout his life, he lived with truths that could never be spoken aloud. The summer of 1955 marked a turning point when Paul Newman first stepped into the dazzling spotlight of Hollywood. People said he had everything: striking looks, innate talent, and a wide-open future ahead. Yet, in that very same period during the filming of East of Eden, a quiet bond began to form. It was the secret connection between Newman and James Dean, a colleague of few words often lost in his own thoughts, a connection once caught by the eyes of a makeup artist. They did not make it public, but neither did they completely conceal it. Early morning walks together, long hours sitting silently in the dressing room long after the crew had gone, all of these became undeniable signs. Later, Dean's manager kept several behind-the-scenes photos and admitted they could be useful if the time comes. From that moment on, Newman's contracts began including invisible clauses, stipulations that he was not allowed to have private closeness with any male co-star outside of filming hours. Outwardly, it was presented as a measure to protect his brand image. But those within the circle knew exactly what it was truly about. At the beginning of the 1970s, a small wooden house tucked away in the mountains of Sundance, Utah, began to draw curiosity from the real estate community. The listed owner was an unknown name, but the only visitor who came regularly was Robert Redford. It was said that Redford drove up once a month, always alone, without bodyguards, without fanfare. A neighbor living across the slope recalled the unforgettable image of seeing the two men sitting side by side on the porch, engaged in endless conversation beneath the autumn sunset. They were not merely ordinary friends, but they were never complete strangers either. Their relationship persisted quietly, bound tightly in a way no one dared to disturb. Joanne Woodward, wife, partner, and Newman's anchor for more than half a century, never once spoke publicly about the rumors. Yet years later, a production manager from the film Winning revealed that Joanne had demanded the dismissal of a lighting assistant after only 3 days of work because she had happened to walk in on Paul with the man inside the dressing room when there was no scheduled shoot. There were no arguments, no angry exchanges. Joanne simply told the director one sentence: "If he stays, I cannot go on." The matter was resolved in silence, just like countless Hollywood scandals that were smothered before they ever had the chance to erupt. In 1985, when Rock Hudson publicly disclosed his AIDS diagnosis, Paul Newman prepared a written note for a major interview with Barbara Walters. He intended to share a portion of the truth he had kept hidden for far too long, that he had once loved a man, and that love had completely transformed the way he looked at life. Yet only hours before the interview, a legal representative from the studio he was under contract with appeared carrying a binding clause regarding his public image. The interview was abruptly canceled. No official explanation was ever announced, but everyone in the industry understood. A medical staff member who once worked for Warner Brothers recalled that Newman had come to him in a state of exhaustion, suffering from prolonged insomnia, and had to be prescribed a heavy sedative normally reserved for cases of chronic depression. What was remarkable was that Newman's hospital records were classified as highly confidential. Not a single journalist learned of it, and not a single news item ever leaked. Everything was locked down in absolute secrecy. Joanne passed away several years before Paul. After her death, the family opened a small safe she had always kept for herself. Inside were a few personal papers, along with 6 handwritten letters neatly placed in envelopes labeled Dean to Paul Keep. Strangely, at the lower corner of each letter there was a handwritten mark in black ink reading R.H. According to someone close to Newman, those were the initials of Rock Hudson. It seemed Rock had held on to those letters for a long time and eventually entrusted them to Joanne. No one knows what the letters contained, as the family decided never to release them. Yet their mere existence was enough to unveil an unseen corner of the life of a man the world thought it already knew. The marriage between Paul and Joanne, often hailed as the gold standard of artistic love, in truth began with a contract. A leaked document many years later revealed that 20th Century Fox had once required Newman to marry within 18 months of signing his exclusive contract if he wanted to maintain his position as a leading star. And Joanne, who had been by his side since the earliest days of his career, became the perfect choice in both affection and image. They truly loved each other, but they were also compelled to embody the ideal couple beneath the glare of the stage lights. A secretly taken photograph in 2008, just a few weeks before Newman's death, once circulated among a group of private photographers. The picture captured Paul and Robert Redford sitting across from one another in a small diner in Connecticut. Paul's hand was resting on Robert's, and though their eyes revealed little, the image left viewers speechless. The following day, the photograph was purchased by a third party, and since then, it has never appeared in any publication. Paul Newman departed this world with dozens of stories that remain unresolved. Some secrets were buried forever, but others left behind faint traces, waiting silently for the day they might be pieced together into the truth. 2. Burt Lancaster, the masculine icon and the secret behind dressing room number 3. On the big screen, Burt Lancaster always appeared as the perfect image of a gentleman, strong, elegant, with piercing eyes and a smile as sharp as a razor. Yet behind those roles that made millions of women fall hopelessly in love lay a hidden door that Hollywood never dared to fling wide open. In the summer of 1952, while the film From Here to Eternity was still in its pre-production stage at Paramount Studios' dressing room number 3, suddenly became the quiet subject of backstage gossip. Nobody ever dared to say anything outright, but everyone understood without words. For whenever the shooting schedule stretched late into the night, that door would be locked from the inside, the lights dimmed to a soft golden glow, and the gentle sound of jazz music would begin to play. The first to walk in was always Burt Lancaster. The one who arrived after was James Marlowe, a young Broadway dancer described as having a smile like fire and eyes like thunder. A veteran makeup artist once recalled nobody asked because nobody needed to ask. If the door was locked and the music was still playing, it meant the night was far from over. That relationship was never publicly acknowledged, but it was enough to draw the attention of the FBI. A declassified document released in 1993 revealed that director J. Edgar Hoover had once ordered surveillance on Burt because he was considered to have serious moral risk indicators within the military. The reasoning pointed to secret parties held at a Malibu estate, gatherings that invited only men, most of them young talents who had just signed contracts with Columbia. In July 1960, the offices of Confidential magazine suddenly received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a photograph allegedly showing Burt holding hands with a dark-skinned man on the deck of a cruise ship in Greece. On the back of the photo was written, "He said, we were forever. Now he won't even return my calls." Just a few weeks later, the photo vanished from public view as the studio quietly paid $15,000 to smooth everything over. Even his 22-year-long marriage to his wife, June, was little more than an unspoken arrangement. A Columbia public relations staffer later recalled all three, Burt, June, and a theater director, understood the rules of the game. As long as the image of the ideal man remained intact, what happened behind the curtain, who loved whom, no longer mattered at all. And yet, emotions sometimes slipped beyond control. During the filming of The Swimmer in 1968, Burt physically punched a supporting actor straight in the face after the man made a crude joke about his sexuality. Burt swims so well because he's too used to the bathtub with men. Less than 20 minutes later, the police were on the scene, but the studio stepped in quickly, making sure the entire incident sank into silence. In 1973, Burt had devised a bold plan. He intended to walk away from Hollywood altogether and move to Italy to become a stage director, a place where he could openly live with the man he loved, a French ballet dancer. But only 2 months before the scheduled move, his partner was killed in a car accident on the highway near Nice. The dream collapsed. Burt fell into devastation. And for the next 5 years, he did not take on a single new role. It was not until 2006 that this long silence was finally broken when his son, screenwriter Bill Lancaster, revealed in an interview with Vanity Fair, "My father could become anyone on the screen." But in real life, he lived as though he was constantly running away from himself. He was a hero, a secret lover, and a soul trapped between two worlds that could never come together. 3. Cesar Romero, the first Joker and the all-night parties with male dancers. The third person on this list is none other than Cesar Romero. Behind the legendary Joker's smile, behind the glittering makeup, and the booming laughter that echoed across television screens, lay endless nights that Hollywood never once dared to confront. Cesar Romero, the Cuban-born gentleman with gel-slicked hair and a voice half playful, half dangerous, was once described by Look magazine as the man women dreamed of sleeping with, and the man other men wished they could be. Yet very few people knew that he was in fact the soul behind one of the most intricate and powerful underground worlds of Hollywood during the 1940s through the 1960s. It was a place where celebrities, politicians, and even public moral icons could remove their masks, cast aside their reputations, and live their truth for a few hours. Its internal code name was the Violet Room, but insiders referred to it simply as the room behind the bookshelf. According to the unpublished memoir of a Broadway dancer named Angelo Marquez, every Saturday night, Romero's Hollywood Hills mansion would remain lit until nearly dawn. More than 20 young men, each carefully selected, would be brought there. They wore purple velvet robes, carried no phones, and revealed no real names. They passed through a large painting hanging in the downstairs hallway, which turned out to be a secret door. And behind that door, every moral boundary society had set would be stripped away. In one leaked passage, Angelo wrote, "I saw Rock Hudson shirtless playing the piano in the middle of the room, while Paul Lynde, the famous comedian, was dancing with a senator whose name began with the letter J." They drank from silver goblets engraved with the symbol of an eye, and everyone knew anyone present here, whether a director or a federal judge, was bound to keep silent. The list of those rumored to have appeared in the Violet Room is enough to send chills down the spine. Among them was James Dean, who, according to a housemaid, was once seen stumbling out at 4 a.m., Liberace, sitting in a corner playing the piano, his eyes shimmering with tears as he gazed at a middle-aged man in a tuxedo, said to have been the head of Warner Brothers at the time. And even Senator Prescott Bush, father of George H.W. Bush, was rumored to have attended a secret gathering there in 1950. No photograph has ever surfaced as proof, yet a handwritten note from an FBI assistant read, "Opened mail, April 12th. Note on our house Violet Room." Prescott, each gathering lasted until sunrise, and then everything was cleaned away as though it had never existed. Romero never kept anything for himself, except for a safe hidden behind the brickwork of the second-floor fireplace. A maid named Maria recalled, he always locked it with both a fingerprint and a sequence written in Old Spanish. Nobody knew what was inside, but I once saw Cesar stare at it and whisper, "If I die, a few men on Capitol Hill will never dare to leave their homes." When Cesar Romero passed away in 1994, the mansion was immediately sealed off by a group of strangers. Neighbors claimed they saw a government-plated truck parked at the side gate for 3 straight hours. After that, no one ever knew what happened inside. By 2003, an internal FBI file was leaked. It contained a brief note that left insiders stunned. CR001, not declassified, connected to 3 individuals who once held high-level federal positions. Evidence includes VHS tapes, journals, and recording devices. This was no longer a legend. This was Hollywood, and the Joker truly had an entire kingdom where he did not need to smile, yet still managed to keep dozens of the most powerful people utterly silent. The next name on the list is John Gavin, the silver screen heartthrob who later became the U.S. ambassador to Mexico. But what few knew was that for 25 years, his same-sex romance had been quietly monitored by the CIA as though loving the wrong person was itself a crime. 4. John Gavin, the U.S. ambassador and the love affair. Monitored by the CIA for 25 years. On screen, John Gavin always appeared as the very model of the ideal man. Tall, polished with sharply defined features, and a deep, warm voice that made people believe he had been born to play presidents, military officers, or the perfect husband. He once embodied Caesar in Spartacus 1960, starred alongside Doris Day in Midnight Lace, and left a lasting impression as the male lead in Douglas Sirk's A Time to Love and a Time to Die in 1958. It was during this very film that a secret romance began, quiet, desperate, and destined to stretch over more than 2 decades. That man was Robert Lansing, a handsome actor who had gained fame through the television series 12 O'Clock High. The two first met at a supporting role audition for A Time to Love and a Time to Die. According to the account of a retired lighting technician, the entire crew quickly noticed that the way John looked at Robert was not the same as an ordinary social glance. In an interview with Vanity Fair in 1999, he recalled, "They often slipped away to sit together inside the props truck lighting cigarettes for one another, and John would stroke Robert's hair in a way no one ever does with a colleague." But by 1960, when Gavin officially stepped into the ranks of Hollywood's A-list stars, the studio suddenly convened what they called a morality meeting, an unspoken form of censorship aimed at actors suspected of living outside the standards of traditional family values. Just 3 weeks later, a shocking announcement was made. John Gavin had abruptly married actress Constance Towers, a woman he had only briefly encountered at a handful of social events. The press labeled it a love wedding, but those inside the industry knew it was nothing more than a contract to salvage his career. According to the March 1961 issue of Confidential, the marriage had been arranged by a universal lawyer serving as an intermediary with the direct involvement of high-level media representatives. Within only 24 hours, every trace of Robert Lansing vanished from John Gavin's life. Joint photographs, destroyed letters gone, even the Big Sur cabin was sold off to a doctor whose identity remained unknown. Yet the two men continued to meet secretly for many years. The turning point came in 1981 when President Ronald Reagan, a longtime friend and political ally, appointed John Gavin as U.S. Ambassador to Mexico. Before assuming the post, Gavin was required to sign an absolute declaration of morality, pledging that he would never engage in any conduct contrary to the values of the traditional American family. What nobody knew at the time was that even as he was swearing his oath of office, Robert Lansing was waiting for him at a small villa in the suburbs of Santa Fe, a place where they would often meet on weekends. The secret unraveled when investigative journalist Richard Halperin of the Washington Star received an anonymous letter alleging that John Gavin had been secretly leaving the U.S. Embassy in Mexico on weekends to visit a lover's villa near Chapultepec Hill. Shortly afterward, the CIA launched a covert investigation under the codename El Doble, classifying it as a Level 3 national security risk, fearing that Gavin could be blackmailed by foreign powers through his private life to compromise diplomatic negotiations. But the worst blow came from within his own household. One evening in 1982, Constance Towers, Gavin's wife, discovered a handwritten letter from Robert to John, hidden carefully inside a Bible at the bedside. The letter ended with the line, "Even if you are an ambassador or a saint, you will always be my John." The very next morning, Robert was attacked by two unidentified men as he left a cafe in New Mexico. He suffered a broken arm head injuries and was hospitalized for nearly a week. Though no charges were ever filed, many within the industry believed it had been an organized warning. Pressed by overwhelming pressure from both the government and his private life, John Gavin was forced to sever all contact with Robert. In a phone call lasting barely 2 minutes, according to Robert's close friend, John choked out the words, "They are threatening you. And this time, I cannot save you." Soon after, Gavin moved permanently into the ambassador's residence in Mexico City, while Robert relocated to New York, living in seclusion until his death in a car accident in 1994. Though the relationship had ended, Gavin never truly forgot. A church worker in Santa Fe recalled that during Robert's funeral, an elderly man in a baseball cap and dark glasses arrived late and sat quietly in the last pew. When the service concluded, he walked forward, placed a wooden rosary on the coffin, and left without uttering a single word. On the beads was carved the inscription, "Forgive me, R." In 2018, when John Gavin himself passed away, a strange detail surfaced in his will, a sum of $5 million left to a mysterious beneficiary under the name RLG, transferred through a trust established in 1985. Many believe it stood for Robert Lansing, and Gavin combined a discreet gesture of tribute to the man he had once loved. In his final interview in 2010, when asked about his private life, John Gavin offered only one sentence, as if closing every hidden door once and for all. "I represented America with honor, but my heart belonged to someone I was never allowed to name." And what about the other stars, those who not only represented America, but also became symbols of forbidden love? The next story belongs to George Nader, who dared to live openly with his partner and paid for it with his entire career. 5. George Nader, banished by Hollywood for daring to live truthfully with his partner for 55 years. In the mid-1950s, Universal Pictures had high hopes that George Nader would become the second Rock Hudson. With his chiseled face, deep and warm voice, and an ideal physique, he seemed destined for stardom. A $1 million contract was signed, scripts poured in one after another, and the press eagerly listed him among the breakthrough stars of the year. Yet in just 72 fateful hours, George's entire career collapsed. A Super 8 reel, secretly filmed inside his private home in Palm Springs, captured the moment George kissed another man. That man was none other than Mark Miller, his personal manager, his companion, his lover, and the one who understood George better than anyone else. Shortly afterward, every project was canceled. An internal memo dated December 3, 1955 from Universal bluntly stated, "There is no longer commercial value in marketing George Nader's image to the general public." The crisis did not end there. A reporter for Variety revealed that at least 3 studios had hired private detectives to follow Mark Miller, suspecting that he was the one responsible for George's refusal to accept leading roles as men in love with women. Rumors circulated that Rock Hudson himself, at the urging of the studio, once tried to persuade George to break up with Mark to protect his career. But George only laughed and firmly replied, "I will not act a part not on screen and not in my own life." By August 1960, a closed trial was held at the Los Angeles court. George filed a lawsuit against a European film distributor that had used photos of him and Mark at the beach as a tool of coercion. They demanded that George dub a film with homosexual implications under the threat of blackmail. The case never went public, but contemporary press reported that George was returned 13 personal diaries and a suitcase full of photographs that had been illegally seized in exchange for absolute silence. During a live KABC radio broadcast in 1972, a caller suddenly asked him directly, "Do you ever regret choosing to live openly?" George paused for a few seconds before slowly answering, "If I had hidden it, maybe I would still be a hero on the screen. But I cannot sacrifice the truest part of myself just to play the falsest role out there." A handwritten letter from George's mother, revealed only after her death, read, "They can take everything from you, my son. But if you keep the one you love by your side until the very end, then that is the greatest victory of all." Years later, at George's memorial service in 2002, Mark Miller read that very letter aloud, his voice breaking with tears. According to an exclusive investigation by The Advocate by late 1968, the FBI had opened a classified file under the code ND2261, suspecting that George and Mark were involved in a clandestine letter network for Hollywood's gay community. Even without concrete evidence, the file was kept active until 1981, labeled as a potential risk to national media security. By the late 1970s, George and Mark had withdrawn into seclusion at a small house in Maui, Hawaii. But peace was never easy to come by. A tabloid ran a venomous headline, "Hollywood's oldest gay couple still living shamelessly," sparking a wave of hostility. They received a barrage of anonymous death threats, forcing local police to provide them with protection for 3 full months, simply because they had dared to live truthfully. In 2001, George quietly passed away due to lung complications. Among his belongings was an unpublished memoir draft, handwritten with the line, "Hollywood stole my money, my fame, and my career. But they never managed to take Mark away from me." That manuscript remains locked away to this day by a major publisher, citing the reason that it could damage the legacy of other associated figures. Just a few years later, Mark Miller also passed on. In his will, there was only a single line written for George: "Thank you for never abandoning me, even when the entire world turned its back." Behind the dazzling glow of stardom lies a truth that never made it to the front page but will forever remain in the hearts of those who believe love does not need permission to exist. 6. Roddy McDowall, the FBI and the hidden collection of male nudes in his basement. In Hollywood, there are those who shine as brightly as the stage lights themselves, glamorous, dazzling, untouchable, as if nothing in the world could ever pierce their aura. Roddy McDowall was one of those figures. He possessed a youthful face as clear and delicate as English crystal, a shy smile reminiscent of a well-bred schoolboy, and a voice as light and fleeting as an autumn breeze drifting through the streets of London. Yet, behind that gentle exterior was a shadowy world that few dared to approach, and even fewer were brave enough to confront. On September 2, 1974, when the FBI suddenly raided Roddy's mansion in Laurel Canyon, many assumed it was a bust tied to politics or narcotics. they were wrong. What was uncovered that day shook Hollywood in ways far more terrifying. In a concealed basement hidden behind the sliding panels of a bookcase, federal agents began pulling out box after box film reels, carefully cataloged folders, stacks of photographs, all meticulously organized. And they shared a single subject nude photographs of men, thousands of them. According to an FBI insider quoted in a leaked 2003 report, there were at least 395 images of naked men, each filed with a number and annotated with details such as height, weight, personal preferences, and in some cases even the names of former lovers. Some bore chilling notes like, "Only send if blackmail is required, keep until he retires or taken while drunk." What made it even more explosive was that among those thousands of photographs were images of 3 individuals who at the time held significant positions in the United States Congress. Beyond photographs, the agents also discovered a silent Super 8 film. It depicted 5 masked men completely nude pole dancing while surrounded by drunken onlookers laughing and jeering. One of the men was believed to be a celebrated director who had won an Academy Award in 1968. His identity was officially suppressed, but only 2 months later he abruptly announced his resignation, citing nervous exhaustion before vanishing from Hollywood forever. Roddy himself was never formally charged. Yet after that incident, his name was permanently placed on the U.S. intelligence community's special surveillance list. He was suspected of being a key player in a sophisticated blackmail ring tied to anti-war artists, homosexual circles, and conservative politicians. The file was marked with the code RDM-74 and stamped with the warning not to be declassified before 2055. A close friend of Roddy who insisted on anonymity once recounted, I asked him directly, "Why do you keep all of those photographs, Roddy?" He just shrugged and whispered softly, "Because if you hold what they fear most, then no one will ever dare to hurt you." The parties at Roddy's house became whispered legend within the industry, though few ever dared to speak of them publicly. Rock Hudson once invited him to his birthday celebration in 1976. At that gathering, a young actor emboldened by drink asked bluntly, "Is it true you actually keep nude photos of everyone you've ever worked with?" Roddy merely gave a faint smile, raised his glass of red wine, and replied calmly, "Not exactly. But those who have something to lose, yes, I do." A former darkroom technician who worked for Roddy in 1969 later revealed, "One time I accidentally dropped a roll of film. When I opened it, there were photos of a famous actor tied with a red silk tie, blindfolded his hands, shackled with a belt. The note beneath the image read, 'He's about to receive a Golden Globe.' After that day, I never dared to return to work. And even now, decades later, I still cannot bring myself to throw that picture away." When Roddy succumbed to lung cancer in 1998, his family immediately hired a team of digital specialists to secure and recover all his storage devices. Yet, more than 300 sample photographs vanished mysteriously, along with a Cuban-born gardener who had been hired less than 2 months earlier. That man was never seen again. And across the ocean, in that very same decade, there lived another legendary figure, Britain's own Sherlock Holmes. A man who devoted his entire life to solving the riddles of crime, but who remained powerless against the fractures within his own heart wounds he could never repair. 7. Jeremy Brett, England's Sherlock Holmes and the broken heart forced to live straight. The next name on this list is Jeremy Brett. Before embodying Sherlock Holmes and becoming the immortal icon of Granada Television's classic series in the 1980s, Jeremy had already been a brilliant star of the stage with the Royal Shakespeare Company. Yet alongside that dazzling career, he carried within him a secret love affair with an aristocratic gentleman of royal blood. That man, who would later become the husband of a famous princess, had once loved Jeremy with obsessive passion, but in the end chose the safe path in order to preserve his reputation. According to Jeremy's closest friend, that affair ended cruelly with a freezing slap across the face and 2 train tickets torn to pieces at Paddington Station like a ritual farewell that could never be undone. In June 1963, Jeremy's family forced him to meet with a private psychiatrist in Belgravia. The doctor advised him to undergo hormone therapy in order to stabilize his sexual orientation, a euphemism for what the press of that era bluntly referred to as straightening treatment. For 3 consecutive months, Jeremy was injected with hormones, which resulted in sleep disorders, nervous exhaustion, and even mild hallucinations. Yet in the medical report sent back to his parents, the doctor wrote coldly, "Positive progress, no longer exhibiting abnormal emotional relationships." Only a few months later, Jeremy suddenly married actress Anna Massey. The rushed wedding shocked the press. Years later, after Anna's passing, a diary was discovered in her wardrobe containing a line that left readers shaken. "On our wedding night, he would not look me in the eye. He lay turned toward the wall, trembling like a child. I could not tell if he was crying or if he was playing the role he despised most." That brief marriage lasted barely 4 years, ending in a custody battle that Anna later described in the Times as a case between 2 strangers who once tried to act as lovers. After the divorce, Jeremy completely withdrew from any public romantic life. For more than 2 decades, he lived like a shadow, without love, without scandal, without even the faintest rumor. By 1984, when Jeremy was chosen to play Sherlock Holmes' Granada, television inserted a special clause into his contract. The lead actor was required to maintain the image of a single man and to avoid any private relationships that might disrupt the audience's perception of the character. An internal email from Granada's executive producer, leaked years later, stated explicitly, "We cannot allow Holmes to have any emotional attachments beyond intellect, and we absolutely cannot allow Brett to be linked to any deviant tendencies on screen or off," one unnamed colleague once recalled. During breaks in filming, Jeremy would stand before the dressing room mirror whispering words as though he were speaking to someone who wasn't there. Once, I heard him murmur, "If Holmes is the role created to hide me, then forgive me. I have played it far too well." In 1989, during a shoot in Whitby, Jeremy suddenly collapsed in his dressing room. Beside him were the remains of 10 sedative tablets and a handwritten 3-page letter addressed to someone known only as J. No one ever discovered who. The letter had been tucked inside a copy of The Adventures of the Dancing Men, its final line chilling. "If we cannot be together in life, then let me carry you into my final performance." After Jeremy's death in 1995, a leaked document from a private clinic on Harley Street revealed that in 1971 he had registered for pre-gender transition assessment. But the request had been denied on the grounds that it did not meet the ethical medical standards of the United Kingdom. A former assistant told The Guardian, "I don't think he wanted to become a woman. I believe he only wanted to live as his true self without needing anyone's permission." At the small memorial service held by Granada, there was no family present and no television coverage. In that silence, an anonymous letter was read. "In place of a eulogy, you played Holmes so completely that the world no longer saw Jeremy Brett." But there was one mystery even the greatest Holmes could never solve: your heart imprisoned for an entire lifetime. And if you think that was the final tragedy, be prepared for another story, that of a blonde prince of Hollywood who once made countless young women swoon, yet left behind no trace of romance with any woman at all. Beneath the dazzling spotlight of Hollywood, they once stood as living legends, idols etched into the hearts of millions of fans. Yet behind the radiant smiles on the silver screen and the thunderous applause lay a different truth. These stars were forced to conceal their real selves, compelled to bury their homosexual identity all the way to their final breath. It was never out of shame, but because an unforgiving system would never allow them the freedom to truly live as who they were. And what about you? How many other stars do you think had to wear that glittering mask? And when will the truth finally be restored to its rightful place? Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us which figure from today's video lingers in your mind the most, leaving you haunted. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss even more shocking revelations about the hidden backstage world of Hollywood.